In parts of the United States hard hit by the coronavirus pandemic, planning is underway to establish overflow hospitals.
The state of Florida has recorded more than 250,000 coronavirus cases, while in Texas, Arizona and South Carolina, the death rate has doubled in just the last week. Chief Foreign Correspondent Philip Williams has more from Washington.
You're getting reports of, say, 90% occupancy, but that doesn't really tell you the whole story, because in some areas of some states, it's already at capacity. They're already having to ship patients out to other hospitals. And the concern is, when those hospitals are filled up, well, what next? Well, what next is that in some areas, in Texas and Florida, they're considering reactivating plans they'd had put in place in March to take over convention centres and effectively establish temporary hospitals for these COVID overflows, because they show no sign of abating. This crisis, particularly in the West and the South, it just goes from bad to worse, and it doesn't seem to have any sort of break on it. We're getting terrible statistics. We're getting closer to 70,000 a day, and just a couple of weeks ago that it was at 30,000 a day. So it's exploding exponentially. Of course, there are variations, but when you look at the overall charts, they're all looking very bad. And it's not just those southern states; some other states too. Wisconsin, for example, up in the north, they're reporting increases as well. Nothing like what's happening in the south. But the fact that the indications are going in the wrong direction has everybody worried.
Phil, as we see this explosion in cases, the deaths, the pressure on the hospitals, are we still also seeing businesses continue to reopen? We're seeing some pictures here of, I think, Disneyland.
Yes, this is Disneyland. I mean, of all the places and timing to be opening Disneyland, now, of course, they're taking temperatures there, and they're saying they're doing it with social distancing, and Mickey and Minnie Mouse have to keep their distance. But really, I mean, for example, in parts of Florida now, in Dade County, they've got positive results of close to 30%. That means of all of the people that are tested, 30% are coming back with positive results. So it's really, really hot and really taking off badly, particularly in Florida. And the governor there is saying, well, yes, yeah, take precautions, whatever, but he's not ordering masks. Some towns are ordering masks in their towns, but in some states, for example, Georgia, the Atlanta mayor wants masks made mandatory. She said she's going to make them mandatory. But then the governor has said, no, you can't do that. You don't have the authority to do that. It's up to the people to choose to do that themselves. But at what point in a crisis do you decide, actually, we do need to take some rather drastic measures? And it's this competition, this endless push and pull between the health concerns and the economic concerns. And at the moment, some of the governors in some of the southern states seem to have the economic concerns more front in mind than the actual casualties. And of course, that means that effectively, this is what the health authorities say, that's going to cost more lives in the long run. So it's a question of jobs and economy versus lives. Well, it's a hard one to measure, but I think most people, especially if you're the one that has lost a loved one or has somebody that's very sick in hospital, you're likely to say, well, no, the lives matter more than the jobs for the moment.
And Phil, President Donald Trump was supposed to be holding a rally in New Hampshire today, but that's been cancelled. Why is that?
Yes, it has. He said because of thunderstorms that were predicted, and this was cancelled a day or so ago. And yeah, there were thunderstorms predicted at that time. But, we saw what happened in Tulsa. You build it, and they did not come. He didn't get the audience that he thought he'd get. So perhaps they were looking at smaller audiences there, and that was a way of avoiding that. Who knows? Maybe it's exactly as advertised. But he is going to Walter Reed Hospital in Maryland later today, and where he's going to do something that the president has never publicly been seen doing before, and that is wear a mask. Finally, he seems to have got the message from his aides that this is a very bad look, not wearing a mask, that it sends the wrong message to the nation. And I can tell you for a fact that I've been at occasions where you have Trump supporters gathered in a group and no masks are worn. Why? Because it's seen as almost if you wear a mask, you're a Democrat supporter, because it's not what the president does. Well, now the president is going to wear a mask. It really it's going to be interesting to see if this is a one-off occasion or whether this is breaking in a new tradition for him. But certainly many of the health professionals are saying if only the president would wear a mask, that would send at least a strong signal to his supporters and everybody else in the country that it's okay and that's actually a good idea.
Phil Williams there. Now let's stay with the situation in the United States, and Bruce Wolpe, who is a senior fellow at the United States Studies Center and a former Democrat staffer, says that Donald Trump will follow health advice as he visits a hospital.
There's no more vulnerable population than when you go into a hospital, and that is the advice that he's been getting from his staff finally, and so I guess he will wear a mask. He was photographed wearing a mask at a plant in Michigan. He didn't know he was being photographed. He didn't like it. He's a very vain person. He cares about his appearance very much. And he believes a mask is a sign of weakness and giving in to the virus and things like that. But it does have these political connotations. If you wear a mask, you're a Democrat, a liberal. And again, what Phil was talking about, you have health and the economy. Actually, the two need to be unified to deal with this effectively. But it's politicized and it's divided the country at a cost of, new cases and deaths, both are rising very significantly.
On the advice of health authorities in the United States, here in Australia we hear our leaders constantly saying, well, I'm listening to the advice of the health authorities, I'm following the advice of the health authorities. Are the voices of the health authorities being heard by the leadership in the United States?
They're being sidelined. I mean, Dr. Fauci, who I guess is the tabula rasa of healthcare in the United States and the voice of authority, and he's very respected. He has not briefed the president since June 2nd. And when he's invited to sit in on the coronavirus task force meetings, they say, why don't you go to the Situation Room in the White House and meet, but the task force is meeting at the Department of Health and Human Services. So he's out of the play to a significant degree, and he's giving interviews on the side about his view, his honest view of what's going on. And he's very concerned about the direction of the country, that they've missed it. And that is not something that Trump wants to hear. And so you have a divide between the health expert establishment and the Trump political establishment.
There's also his Republican base is also questioning his actions as well. I want to bring our attention now to some very interesting campaigning ads that have come out in the last few weeks or so. One in particular, it's by Republicans against Trump, and I think we have a little bit of it, so we want to watch it now.
Yes.
For the first time in our memory, many Americans are asking, does history still have a place for America? There are some who answer no. Let us resolve tonight that young Americans will always find a city of hope in a country that is free. And let us resolve they will say of our day and of our generation that we did keep faith with our God, that we did act worthy of ourselves, that we did protect and pass on lovingly that shining city on a hill.
Very interesting. Has your party let you down? Basically, that's what the question is. But what's the alternative?
Just some context on this. That speech by Ronald Reagan was given in 1980 on the eve of his election as president against Jimmy Carter. And it's called the Shining City on the Hill speech. And so Republican voters against Trump and there are a group of disaffected Republicans, they principally around George W. Bush, and that's sort of the old Republican Party that President Trump has taken over. They have used this speech with images from America Today to make a point that there's a deviation from what the Republican Party stood for. If you're a true Republican, you should either vote Democratic or stay home, but don't support President Trump. But the juxtaposition of Ronald Reagan, who is the demigod of Republican leadership and thought, still being used to make a point against the sitting Republican president, it's a devastating ad. And we will see more of this. There's another group called the Lincoln Project, which is run by other disaffected Republicans, and they have ads too. So while there isn't someone who is split from Trump publicly to threaten him directly, there is a movement among some Republicans against him. And Trump needs every vote he can get. He won very narrowly. He depends on his base coming out. He wants them to vote. But this sort of thing could diminish a bit the Republican vote.
But where will those disaffected Republicans go? They're not going to vote for Joe Biden.
Some will vote for Joe Biden. Some will stay home. And again, it's in America, voluntary voting, it's a turnout issue.
That's interesting. So what you're indicating then that the Republican Party is basically willing to throw this next election as long as President Trump doesn't get back into the White House?
Well, the Republican Party is heavily united behind him, but there is this wing of it, and it is anytime there's I learned this in politics a long time ago. When you enjoy beating up your own party more than going after the opposition, you lose. And that happened to Democrats. Democrats enjoyed beating up on Jimmy Carter, and Ronald Reagan could win. So if Republicans enjoy beating up on Donald Trump more than going after Joe Biden, yes, Joe Biden will be the beneficiary.